What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to FOAMBIRDS RC. I'm Hugh, and today we are going to be starting the Build Tips series. The goal is to give you guys some practical, easy to use, easy to implement tips for your builds that will hopefully make them cheaper and more scale and just a lot more fun. So today we're going to be starting off with how I scratch build my planes. So let's switch to the overhead camera and dive in. Okay, switching to the overhead camera here. So basically the idea behind scratch building is so that you can cut your own pieces, right? This is really helpful for a couple different reasons. Number one is your own designs. If you design your own airplanes, they're not gonna have speed build kits for them. If you've got a laser cutter, then you can make your own, that's great. Most of us don't have laser cutters. I definitely don't. So if I ever make a design, I am forced to cut it out myself. The second reason that you would scratch build is if you want to modify a design that already exists. I modify a lot of flight test designs. I tweak them in just little ways. For instance, I put FPV on a Scout. So I had to run some wires through, had to change a couple shapes just to make it a little bit more FPV friendly. I could probably not have done that had it been a speed build kit. If I'd wanted to enlarge the elevator, if I'd wanted to enlarge the rudder, that would have been really hard because the rudder and the elevator are already cut. If I scratch build them, I can literally just draw and then cut my own elevator instead of using the one from the plans. So the third and I think most important reason to scratch build, for me at least, is price. Scratch building is really, really, really cheap. You're only paying for $1 a sheet of foam. Sure, it takes a little bit more time. Sure, it takes a little bit more practice and determination, but ultimately you're going to get a much, much, much cheaper airplane. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck. So, once you decide to scratch build, there are two routes that I know of that you can take. This is not to say that I know every single way that you can scratch build. I don't. If anybody who's watching this has uses a different technique than I do, please post it in the comments below. I would love to check it out. I would love to maybe use it on some future builds. I am definitely no expert, so there are a lot of people out there who are going to be better at this than I am. But, that being said, I do know of two ways, and I'm going to teach them both to you, hopefully, today. So the first way, I'll just put this elevator here out of the way, is the flight test way. I'm not going to cover this super in-depth, because they go into it a lot in their scratch building video. If you guys haven't checked that out, be sure to do it if you're interested in this technique. So basically, the idea is that they spray adhere their sheets of paper onto the foam board. That will work great. You're going to get very, very, very nice clean cuts. Nothing is going to crease. I know sometimes when you tape it down, the paper kind of goes like that, and you just really don't get a clean cut. If you spray adhere it down, you're going to have a very nice cut. It's going to come out exactly like it does on the paper. But there is a problem with that. It's a problem that I care a lot about, and that is weight. When you're building a scale airplane, the goal is to keep it light. You want to add scale details, right? You want to add paint, primer, and rivets, and cockpit detail, lots of 3D printed parts. Those all take a lot of weight. So to cut down on weights in other places is pretty fundamental to a scale build. When you're adding 40 sheets of paper to your foam board in a build, it's not a great way to cut down on weight. You're going to have more weight than you need. It won't be a problem if you're just building a sport type airplane, but if you want to add more weight in other things later on, then I would definitely recommend not spray adhering them on. So, my technique solves that problem. It will take a little bit more time probably but once you get it down, it will be very easy, and it saves that extra weight for steel details. So I've got right here just a blank scrap sheet of foam and a horizontal stabilizer from the flight test. I think this was the Master Series. Yeah, Master Series Mustang. So basically, what I do here is usually I will tape all of the pieces of paper together. Before I even put them on the foam, I will tape them all up so that they're perfectly in alignment. Then I will tape them to the foam. I'm not going to tape them here because it's honestly too small and I don't want to bother. So really what I'll do is I'll just push a couple of push pins in. For a piece this small, it's going to be all of the stability that it's going to need, because you're not going to be cutting through this paper. You're just going to be poking through it. So put all 4 of these push pins down here. Okay, so now we've got this pretty firmly on. It's not going to wobble around. So now it's on to the next part, and the part that's I think most different through most other scratch building techniques. So basically the idea behind my technique is connect the dots. So you're going to use like a pokey tool. I usually use this. It's got a nice sharp edge on it. I'm not even sure where it's from. I think it came with like a woodworking kit that we got, but it works very well for poking holes in foam board. If you don't have one of these, a push pin will work just fine. You're probably not going to be able to hold a push pin for as long. It'll get uncomfortable eventually, but if a push pin's all you have, you can definitely make that work. For me, since I've got this, I might as well use it, and let's get started here. So the goal is you want to put a dot into each of the places where a line is going to start or end, right? So this is obviously a great place to start, right in the front of the leading edge. And then I'm going to put another line, another dot right here at the end of this leading edge. Before it curves, I'll put another line just to tell me where to start and stop this straight line. Now when I start curves, I usually like to put a series of dots, like usually 4 or 5, maybe more if it's a really, really big curve, like the wing, the outer section of a wing. I'll usually put 10 or 11, just because you can space them out a lot more. But usually I like to put, for curves this small and this tight, I'll put one maybe every 1/3 of a 1/4 of an inch. So I'll just do that right now. So now I have a nice curve of dots right here, and this will make it really easy to freehand this curve. So all I'm going to do now here, I'll take this push pin out and move it out of the way. All I'll do now is I'll put another one right here for this score cut. That way I can draw a score cut all the way across, and I'll now put one here, 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 maybe another one right there, and then right there. Definitely can't forget this right there. You see that I'm putting just very nice little dots wherever I think they need to go. One important thing that I would say is try not to put any dots in the middle. Originally when I did this, I would put a dot like every little maybe inch or 2. You got a lot easier drawn lines, but the foam board itself would have a bunch of dots right through the middle of the elevator. And honestly, on a scale build, when finishing is so important, that just doesn't look good. So I try to minimize the amount of dots that I have in the middle of the foam board. I'll put one at the beginning of the control horn slot here and one at the end, because I have to do those with the control horn slot. But pretty much everything else I'm going to try to keep on the outside. I'm not going to draw this little thing right here where you put the barbecue skewer, because I don't really need that right now. This stabilizer is just for demonstration purposes. It's not going to go on an actual airplane. So now that we have the dots, I'm going to take out the push pins here. If you're using tape, cut the tape. And here we go. Now we've got a bunch of dots in a sheet of foam. This right here can get very confusing. This might be one of the most difficult steps of the scratch build is deciding what dots go where, what dots are on which pieces, what dots mean. So what I like to do is I actually like to have the original reference right here. I can see where I put dots because there are still holes in the paper. So I can see exactly where I put dots, and that will help me to line up where the dots are on here with what should actually be there, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a Sharpie. I usually like to use a Sharpie because they're really dark and they make clean lines. So with a pencil or something, the lead could break, and that's just a big bother. You don't really want to have to deal with that. So I usually try to use a Sharpie or a marker or whatever. You could probably use a pen too. Those would work. I've never tried that, but I just like a nice Sharpie. Usually I use black, but I'm going to use blue in this case because why not? So I'll start with the freehand because we won't have to get a ruler out for those. So I'll just freehand these curves. So that was a push pin. That was a push pin as well. But this is a curve. So you really have to have a distinction between what's actually on the build and what's not. That's super, super important. Then I'm also going to freehand these short little straight lines. Once you do this enough, you're going to be able to freehand these with pretty apparent ease. It's not going to be a huge deal to freehand some smaller straight lines. But once these lines get bigger, I usually like to use a ruler. So now I've freehanded basically everything that I think I can. So I've got this line, I've got this line, I've got this line, and I've got this line left. And of course I have the line going through the middle, the score line. I wouldn't usually try to freehand those just because they're so long, and I just really would rather use a ruler. So I'm going to take a ruler. A 12-inch ruler in this case is pretty much all I'm going to need for these lines. But one thing that I do like to do here, and one thing that I think is pretty important, is I like to leave a little bit of gap between the ruler and the dot. The reason for this is the tip of the Sharpie is in the middle, but the edge of the Sharpie is what's going to be rubbing against the ruler. So there's actually going to be a slight gap between where it hits the ruler and where it actually draws the line. So I like to account for that gap when I lay down the ruler so that I have a nice straight line without any like bumps up or down. So I'll do the same thing on all of these lines here. There's number 2, and we're on to the trailing edge. Sorry guys, this Sharpie is running out, but that is going to be enough. So now we have a problem. I can't use a 12-inch for the bevel. It's just, sorry, not the bevel. What am I saying? For the score cut. I can't use a 12-inch for the shortcut because it's just simply too long. So I have my yardstick here. I don't usually like to use this just because it's a little bit more unwieldy than a little 12-inch ruler. But for pieces that are longer than 12 inches, it's pretty necessary. So again, I'm going to keep a little gap here between the two, and I'm going to draw the line. So what you're going to notice about this line is I'm dashing it, just like Flight Test does on their score cuts. I think this is really important. I have done a number of builds, a number of pieces, where I mistake a score cut for a real cut and cut all the way through it. Not very helpful. I usually have to redo the part. Sometimes I don't realize it and it will like literally crack off while I'm building it. So that's definitely something you want to try to avoid. One easy way to do that is just to put a dash line. Then I know absolutely for sure that I'm not going to cut through more than halfway because it's a score cut. So now I have the outline of this elevator on here. Usually what I like to do now is I just like to make sure that I've gotten all the lines. So I've got the bevel, and I've got the outline, and I've got the control horn cut. Those are the only lines that I made. If this was a real horizontal stabilizer for a real airplane, I would also check to make sure that I had that line. But for now, for example purposes, this looks good. So let's move on. I'll put this off to the side here. Still keep it within eyesight just in case I have other questions, but it hopefully won't be very necessary from now on. So you'll notice my X-Acto knife. I've got a really nice fresh blade on here. This is super important. I cannot tell you how many cuts I've made with a dull knife that just don't turn out well. If I'm cutting a curve, it will rip. If I'm cutting a straight line, there'll be like these weird perforations in the foam. It just really won't turn out like I want it to, especially for a scale build when finish is really what matters most. So these blades, these are like number 11 blades, I think. I buy them in bulk. They're great. These are super cheap, and whenever I feel like a blade is getting even the slightest bit dull, I change it out so that I can get really smooth cuts for every piece. So I'll just put it in here and draw the line. If you guys want to use a ruler on these lines, you absolutely can. I would definitely suggest it for your first few builds. If you are not fully confident in cutting a straight line a long way, I know that can be hard. I know it takes some getting down. So I would definitely recommend starting out just using a nice ruler. Here we go. So as I do curves, I do something a little bit special because I've noticed that sometimes when I make curves, my X-Acto blade slopes a little bit, and that gives me a bevel. So I don't want a bevel on those curves. It doesn't really look great, and ultimately it's not going to be as aesthetically pleasing of a part if you've got a bevel. So basically what I like to do is I like to try to stand the X-Acto blade up pretty much as straight as possible. The idea behind that being, if the X-Acto blade is straight, then there's no way that it can bevel because there's no angle on the blade. So go ahead and crack that off right there, and you can see I've got a really nice curve with no bevel. So I'll quickly go ahead and finish this up here. There we go. So now I have the piece cut out, right? It looks good. It looks, I'll just lay it on top of this here so that you guys can see. It is exactly the same as on the plans. So you really are getting the same quality as if you spray it here down. I know it does take a little bit more time, but ultimately you're gonna get a really good quality part. So on to the score cut. For this, I just like to use a very, very, very shallow angle. Maybe depending on the angle of your blade to the handle, I like to usually just lay the blade down basically flat. Give it barely any bite into the foam. The reason for that being, foam cracks really easily. So if I just score it very, very lightly, maybe 50% of the way down, then it'll actually crack along that line and I'll get a very, very, very nice score. So I'm actually, in the next video, I'm going to tell you guys how to bevel these, show you my way of beveling. I don't use an X-Acto knife because it's just a hassle. So definitely, if you're interested in that, stick around for that video. But for now, we have a finished part. Thank you guys so much for watching. It means more to me than you can ever know. This YouTube channel has been a dream of mine for a very long time, and it's so exciting to see it finally become a reality. If any of you have any techniques that you think would work better than this, please let me know in the comments below. I would absolutely love to check them out. Like I said, I'm not an expert at this, so anybody, any help would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, I'll see you guys at the field.